The Secret Santa fiasco. It was the week before Christmas, and the office of Bright Spark Marketing was buzzing with holiday cheer. The employees had just wrapped up a successful year, and the annual Secret Santa gift exchange was in full swing. The office was decorated with tinsel and fairy lights, and the usual deadlines had been replaced by festive excitement. Every year, the tradition had been growing more elaborate, with a $50 spending limit and the unspoken pressure to impress your colleagues. The gift selection. Bob, a mild-mannered marketing assistant in his mid-30s, had drawn the name of his boss, Ms. Crawford, the CEO of the company. Ms. Crawford was a poised, professional woman in her 40s, always impeccably dressed in business suits and running high-stakes marketing campaigns. Bob knew her as the driven, no-nonsense boss who rarely smiled. He had never really seen her let her guard down, and that made choosing the perfect gift all the more difficult. Bob had spent hours thinking about it, feeling the pressure mounting. He couldn't think of anything safe or appropriate for Ms. Crawford. But then, while scrolling through social media on his lunch break, he saw an ad pop up for a quirky online store. Perfect for someone with a sense of humor, the ad proclaimed, showing a massive, sparkly pink dildo. It was over the top, it was absurd, and for some reason, it felt like the perfect joke gift. After all, Secret Santa was supposed to be fun, right? With only hours left before the exchange, Bob nervously clicked Add to Cart. It was ridiculous, but he was sure Miss Crawford would see the humor in it. After all, she had a reputation for being a little tough, and maybe this would be the gift that cracked her shell. He wrapped it hastily, praying no one would notice. The morning of the exchange. The day of the exchange arrived, and the office was in full festive mode. People were wearing garish ugly sweaters, and a massive Christmas tree stood proudly in the break room. The employees milled about with cups of hot cocoa and gingerbread cookies, laughing and chatting. The pile of presents in the middle of the room was growing, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Bob sat at his desk, anxiously watching the pile of gifts. His turn was coming up, and his stomach churned at the thought of handing over his gift. He peeked over at Miss Crawford, who was hunched over her desk, reviewing an email from a client. She didn't seem to be paying attention, but he knew this moment would make or break him. Finally, his name was called. Bob stood up and walked slowly toward the gift pile, trying to act casual. He grabbed the shiny red box, mentally preparing himself for the worst. "Here you go, Miss Crawford," he said with a forced smile, handing her the gift. "Happy holidays." Miss Crawford looked up from her desk with a polite smile, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she took the gift. "Thank you, Bob." "How thoughtful," she said, a bit too formally. She began to unwrap it slowly, as the entire office watched with bated breath. The room fell silent. Miss Crawford's eyes went wide as she pulled the glittery pink dildo out of the box, holding it up for everyone to see. Her smile faded instantly, and she stared at the gift with growing disbelief. The room was quiet for a few seconds, no one knew what to say. Bob's heart sank. His mouth went dry. His palms were sweaty. The gift was even worse than he had imagined. "Bob," Miss Crawford said, her voice sharp, as she stood up from her desk. "What is this?" I thought it was funny." Bob stammered, looking around the room, the eyes of his colleagues now firmly on him. Miss Crawford's face turned a shade of red that wasn't quite anger, but was still terrifying. She set the dildo back down on her desk and gave Bob a look that could have cut through steel. "Funny," she repeated, her voice now icy cold. "This is not a joke, Bob. This is completely inappropriate. This is a workplace, not a frat party." Bob tried to explain himself, but his words failed him. I thought you might laugh. It's just a gag gift." But no one was laughing. The room was dead silent, the awkward tension almost suffocating. Bob could feel the stares of his co-workers burning through him. His face was so red, he felt like he might burst into flames. Miss Crawford turned to the rest of the room, her professional demeanor returning. "Okay, everyone, I think we've seen enough of that," she said curtly. "We'll continue the gift exchange later. Bob, I need to speak to you in my office." "Now?" The aftermath. Bob's legs were like jelly as he walked to Miss Crawford's office. He knew what was coming, he'd messed up, big time. He had no excuse. He had tried to be funny, but now all he could think about was how he'd just ruined everything. Once inside her office, Miss Crawford closed the door behind her, her expression hardening. She didn't speak at first, letting the silence hang in the air. Bob stood there awkwardly, wringing his hands together. Finally, she spoke. "Bob, I'm incredibly disappointed in you. You've been with this company for 5 years now, and this is the level of maturity I can expect. You think it's acceptable to bring something like that into a professional setting?" I didn't mean it to be bad. I just thought it was funny," Bob said, but his voice faltered. "You obviously don't understand how inappropriate this is," Miss Crawford said, her voice now low and controlled. "This isn't just an embarrassing mistake. This is a major lapse in judgment. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." Bob's stomach churned. "Please, I'm sorry. It was a mistake." She looked at him coldly. "Bob, I don't think you're going to learn from this. I don't think I can trust you anymore. You're fired." Bob's heart dropped. He hadn't seen this coming, not at all. "Please, Miss Crawford. Don't do this. I'll work harder. I won't make another mistake." But it was too late. The damage was done. The walk of shame. As Bob walked out of Miss Crawford's office, the room full of his co-workers was uncomfortably silent. He could feel their eyes on him as he grabbed his things, the shame heavy on his shoulders. The festive decorations that once seemed so cheerful now felt mocking. He passed by the break room, where a few of his colleagues stared at him in disbelief, still processing what had just happened. With his head down, Bob walked out of the office for the last time. The sound of the door shutting behind him felt final. The office holiday party had just turned into his personal nightmare. As Bob stepped out into the cold December air, he couldn't help but think, next year, I'm sticking to socks.